Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, September 20th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today: no Gaza ceasefire before Biden's term ends. So the Wall Street Journal reported on Thursday that senior U.S. officials have concluded that a Gaza ceasefire deal will likely not be reached before President Biden's term ends on January 20th, 2025. So for months now, we've seen Biden administration officials, particularly Antony Blinken, going around claiming that a hostage deal between Israel and Hamas was in sight, while at the same time, we had Netanyahu saying, no permanent ceasefire, listing all these extra demands and doing all these things to make sure a deal didn't happen. And the U.S. officials speaking to the Wall Street Journal blamed the lack of a deal on Hamas, claiming that the main sticking point is over the ratio of Palestinian prisoners to Israeli hostages that will be released. But it has been widely acknowledged by Israeli officials and media outlets that Netanyahu has been sabotaging the chances of an agreement. Members of the Israeli negotiating team said last month that Netanyahu's insistence on maintaining control of the Philadelphia corridor was intended to blow up negotiations. And that's just one example of many Israeli officials, media outlets reporting or saying that this is Netanyahu's fault, including the head of Mossad, who was leading the negotiations, and the other Israeli negotiators. So the U.S. officials said that another reason why a deal is not going to happen was the Israeli operation in Lebanon that blew up thousands of pagers and walkie-talkies, killing dozens of people, including at least 2 children. The U.S. officials said that the attack has made the chances of a major regional war much more likely. You see this picture I put in here of rescuers in Gaza trying to get a body out of this building that was hit by an Israeli airstrike. The health ministry actually did not put out an updated death toll on Thursday. So I don't have one of those stories today, but the Israeli strikes continue to pound Gaza. So one of these U.S. officials said, quote, "No deal is imminent. I'm not sure it ever gets done," end quote. And the report said that a number of top officials in the White House, the Pentagon, and the State Department do not think a deal will happen. President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris both claim that they care about the huge number of civilians being slaughtered in Gaza and that they're working on a ceasefire, but their administration continues to ship weapons to Israel, and there's no sign they've even considered cutting off the flow of arms, which would force Israel to agree to a deal. It would be as simple as that. A senior Israeli official recently acknowledged that without U.S. support, Israel would not be able to sustain operations in Gaza for more than a few months. So in the meantime, the genocidal slaughter in Gaza continues, and the latest figures are from Gaza's health ministry. From Wednesday, they put the number of dead at 41,272, and that does not include the bodies under the rubble or indirect deaths, so it's considered an undercount. Just horrific that this is just still going on every day. We see these Israeli strikes killing people, usually dozens of people every day, including many children, many women, and there's just no end in sight. Like I said, we've seen U.S. officials saying for months and months now that a deal is close, it's coming close, it's going to happen. And of course, it didn't happen. So who knows? Maybe they're wrong here. Maybe we could be a little optimistic and hope that the opposite of what the U.S. is saying happens, because that does seem to be the case quite often. All right, so the next one here: ministers urge Netanyahu to expel civilians from North Gaza. So a group of 27 Israeli ministers and members of the Israeli Knesset have sent a letter to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu urging him to expel Palestinian civilians from northern Gaza and enact a complete siege to cleanse the area. The Israeli ministers and lawmakers called for the Israeli Security Cabinet to adopt a plan known as the General's Plan, which outlines a way for Israel to conquer the territory north of the Netzarim corridor, which is that strip of land that's under control of the Israeli military that separates northern Gaza from the rest of the strip. So according to the Jerusalem Post, the General's Plan involves 4 stages. 1, transferring the civilian population in northern Gaza to the south of the Netzarim corridor. 2, blocking all aid and initiating a full siege of northern Gaza and pronouncing it a closed military zone. 3, preventing deliveries to the area until it is cleansed and the remaining Hamas fighters are defeated by applying intense military pressure. And 4, conducting similar procedures in other areas of the Gaza Strip. So if this plan is carried out successfully, it would result in the ethnic cleansing of northern Gaza and other areas where it's implemented, paving the way for Jewish settlements. That's what they want to do here, is establish settlements. Many Israeli ministers and MKs have openly support reestablishing settlements in Gaza. So, looking at this plan again, the first part is transferring the civilian population in northern Gaza to the south of the Netzarim corridor. Many Palestinian civilians, I'm sure, in northern Gaza would probably ignore any evacuation order since there's nowhere for them to go. And Israel has repeatedly bombed so-called safe zones throughout this genocidal war. And they know that they wouldn't be able to go back to their homes. That would probably be the end result. So that means if they if they go through with this plan, order this evacuation, any of the remaining Palestinian civilians in the north would be killed or starved to death by the Israeli military. I have a fear that something like this we might see something like this happen over the next few months. There's an article in 972 magazine basically saying that they predict this is, something like this is going to happen soon. And I would see, if I were to guess, Netanyahu times things related to the U.S. election. I would guess he would order something like this, if he's going to do it, around a time where, the Biden's a lame duck, maybe, and the administration just isn't going to do anything major, like cut off military aid to Israel to stop it. Maybe wait till January 2025 to do it. And then, the timing would also depend on whether or not it's Kamala Harris coming in or Donald Trump. But, if it's Trump, you hear, what is Trump's rhetoric? Oh, they got to finish the job. Israel's got to finish the job. We'll give them everything they can to finish the job. Well, for Israel, this is finishing the job. Ethnic cleansing and genocide is what they mean by finishing the job. So this letter that was sent to Netanyahu was signed by 3 ministers. One of them was the Women's Advancement and Social Equality Minister, May Golan. That's the Social Equality Minister is calling for this. The Environmental Protection Minister, Idit Silman, and the Combating Anti-Semitism Minister, Amichai Chilki. I definitely butchered that name. It was also signed by members of the Knesset from Netanyahu's Likud party, the Religious Zionism Party, and the Jewish Power Party, all parties that are in the coalition government. All right, so the next one here, Biden's arms transfers to Israel are under internal investigation. So this article is from the Washington Post. Government watchdogs with jurisdiction over the State Department and Pentagon are preparing to publish the results of multiple investigations, scrutinizing the Biden administration's provision of U.S. weapons to Israel for its military campaign in Gaza. And several related inquiries are either underway or planned, their offices told the Washington Post. The forthcoming Inspector General reports, which are not yet public, follow complaints from within the U.S. government that the export of billions of dollars in arms to Israel has violated laws prohibiting the transfer of American military assistance to governments that have committed gross human rights violations or blocked the movement of humanitarian assistance. The Biden administration has acknowledged the likelihood that Israel has used U.S. weapons in Gaza in violation of international law, but says continued arms transfers are justified for the defense of the country. And I think they also claim that they can't prove it. They don't have the concrete evidence, which is complete nonsense. Israel maintains that Palestinian casualties, blah, 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 are the fault of Hamas. The Inspector General inquiries represent one of the last internal checks on an administration intent on surging weaponry to Israel despite criticisms of the country's military tactics and the enormous civilian death tolls in Gaza. So one of the last internal checks. So we'll see what these reports say from the Inspector Generals, and we don't know what they are. There's no hint here of what they're going to say. But the State Department's Office of the Inspector General said that they will soon be publishing the results of one of these reports. All right, so I want to mention our sponsor for today's show, and that is the Expat Money Summit. And this is coming up October 7th to the 11th. This event is being held entirely online, and it is being put on by Mikkel Thorup, who is a highly sought-after expat consultant with 2 decades of experience. He's a fan of antiwar.com. I did his show last year. And, there's going to be a lot of interesting things at this event for people who like this show, who are interested in this kind of stuff. And because geopolitics is important if you're an expat or if you want to move around the world, it's actually very important if that's something that you want to do in the future. And at the event, you will discover why international diversification is a must, looking for those to preserve their liberty and wealth. You'll learn everything you need to know about crafting your perfect plan B, how to quickly acquire a second passport, diversify your finances offshore, invest in international real estate, and get in-depth insights on geopolitics from world-renowned experts. Speakers include Dr. Ron Paul, Doug Casey, Scott Horton, Tom Woods, Mark Faber, Tom Luongo, and many more. To reserve your complimentary ticket, head over to expatmoneysummit.com. That is expatmoneysummit.com. So that's your free ticket. If you want the VIP ticket, which gives you other perks and access to VIP panels, one of which I will be doing about the risk of World War III, click the link in the description or go to expatmoneysummit.com and use the code anti-war when you check out. All right, so to get back into the news here, the Gazan infants who never saw their first birthday. This article is from 972 magazine, the Israeli outlet here, and it's very sad. It's a few stories about some of these babies who did not make it to their first birthday. The health ministry released a list of 710 of their names, and it's an incomplete list. That was what they released earlier this week. So there's a few stories here. One that happened very recently. Asr and Aysel Abu al-Qamsan. They were 4 days old. They were twins. You remember this story. This was the father went out to get their birth certificates. And when he came home, his twins and his wife were dead, killed by an Israeli airstrike. And then another story here, Sabrine Al-Ru Al-Sheikh, 5 days old. Her mother was killed by an Israeli airstrike while she was pregnant, and doctors performed an emergency C-section and got Sabrine out, but she did not last very long. She died at 5 days old. And then a 7-month-old who was killed, this is in October 2023, Manal Abu Aluf, killed by his Israeli strike. And Naim Wissam Abu Anza, 5.5 months old, 2 twins who were killed in an Israeli airstrike, and along with basically almost their entire family. I believe the mother survived, and her husband died, and 11 of her relatives died as well. So just horrific, complete horror show, and this is what the U.S., this is what Biden and Harris are supporting and enabling and allowing to happen. Not just allowing to happen, but actively supporting. This is what military aid to Israel gets you. This is what all these weapon shipments and giving them all this political cover is getting. All right, so the next one here, Nasrallah says Israel has crossed all red lines. So Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah delivered a speech on Thursday and said Israel crossed all red lines by exploding pagers and walkie-talkies in Lebanon over the past 2 days. He said, quote, "With this operation, the enemy crossed all laws and red lines. It didn't care about anything at all. Not humanity, not morality, not legality, end quote. So during his speech, Israeli warplanes flew over Beirut and appeared to drop flares over the city. They broke the sound barrier. They do that to kind of terrorize the people there. Nasrallah said the Israeli operation could be considered war crimes or a declaration of war. He called the attack unprecedented and said that it dealt a blow to Hezbollah. He said, quote, "We cannot be broken by this blow, no matter how big or strong it is, and I can assure you faithfully and with confidence, this hard, unprecedented blow did not bring us to our knees, and it will not," end quote. Nasrallah said that senior Hezbollah officials did not carry the electronic devices that were blown up, and added that what happened did not impact command, control, or infrastructure. So Israel blew up the pagers on Tuesday, killing 12 people, including 2 children and 4 medical workers, and wounding thousands. The following day, Israel detonated walkie-talkies, killing 25 people and wounding over 600. Nasrallah said civilians were targeted in the attacks since explosions occurred in private homes and public places, including hospitals, supermarkets, pharmacies, and crowded streets. A source close to Hezbollah told Middle East Eye that the pagers were used by a wide network of people, including administrators, medical workers, paramedics, media workers, and other civilian members. And we talk about Hezbollah. I mean, there's the militant wing, of course. There's also the political wing, and they oversee social services in southern Lebanon. They run hospitals and things like that. So they have a civilian wing. And, they're kind of a quasi-state within a state in South Lebanon. So Nasrallah vowed that Hezbollah would respond to the Israeli attack and that attacks on Israel would continue until there was a ceasefire in Gaza. He said, quote, "It will be met with tough retribution, and just punishment where they expect it and where they do not," end quote. So the next story here, 2 Israeli soldiers killed by Hezbollah rockets. This one is from Jason Ditz. So Hezbollah is still reeling after the explosions. So Hezbollah reported that they fired at Israeli troops in northern Israel. The strikes wounded at least 8 people in the area, and 2 were killed. So 2 Israeli soldiers were killed in the strikes. And Israel also launched some pretty heavy airstrikes in Lebanon. They said that they launched airstrikes against 100 targets, 100 rocket launchers in southern Lebanon. No word yet as of Thursday night. I might have missed it, but I checked not that long ago. No word yet of casualties in Lebanon, but it does sound like at least Israel launched pretty extensive airstrikes. The Israeli military said that they approved some new plans for Lebanon, so this situation could continue to escalate. We'll see how it plays out. But we still haven't seen anything, major. I mean, these airstrikes seem pretty heavy. There were apparently some of the heaviest since October 7th. But still, we haven't seen anything beyond the kind of exchange of fire across the border. No sign of an Israeli invasion or anything yet, anything like that. All right, so the next one here. Israel notified the U.S. before blowing up pagers, but gave no details. So CNN reported on Thursday that before the pagers blew up in Lebanon, Israel informed the U.S. that it was preparing an operation in the country, but did not say what it was. So the U.S. is saying they were out of the dark. And Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, spoke with Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin early that day and apparently told him that something was coming. And then the pagers blew up, and then they talked again. But we don't know what they said in that conversation. So the White House insisted it was unaware of the details of the plot. But if you remember that day, just a few hours after, the New York Times reported some details about it, and they cited U.S. officials. So the U.S. learned very quickly about the plot if they didn't know about it before. And, you see the response from the U.S. They're basically saying, oh, we don't know. We're still gathering information. And there's just no sign that like a terrorist attack like this is going to impact U.S. support for Israel. Still going to keep giving them weapons. Still going to keep supporting them, vowing to defend them if this thing does turn into a big war. So, no change there, which isn't a surprise, but. All right, so the next story here. Kurt Campbell says that China is the biggest threat in U.S. history. So Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell said on Wednesday that China is the most significant challenge that the United States has ever faced. So he said, quote, "There is a recognition that this is the most significant challenge in our history. Frankly, the Cold War pales in comparison to the multifaceted challenges that China presents," end quote. So Campbell, if you don't know who he is, he's a longtime China hawk. He's been pushing for more of a focus on the Asia Pacific since the Obama administration. He's considered the architect of the so-called Asia pivot that started under Obama. And he was confirmed as the Deputy Secretary of State back in February and previously served as the top Asia official on President Biden's National Security Council. He's a co-founder of the Center for CNAS. I forget what the abbreviation stands for. The Center for, I want to say, a New American Security, but I'm thinking of a New American Century, the PNAC thing. But anyway, CNAS is a very, basically like the neocon think tank today, super hawkish, and he was a co-founder of that. It's funded by the weapons manufacturers and, all that. So he's a super hawk on China. So he said, where am I here? He said, quote, "It's not just a military challenge. It's across the board. It is in the global south. It is in technology. We need to step up our game across the board," end quote. And during the hearing, he called for Europe to get tougher on China and join the U.S. in sanctions on Chinese companies. So the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman responded to what Campbell said, and he said that the comments are steeped in Cold War and zero-sum mentality, and added, quote, "China is committed to carrying out friendly cooperation with all countries in the world, and we do not target any third party when developing normal relations with other countries. By contrast, the U.S. has been strengthening its military alliances, patching up small groupings against China, and coercing other countries to choose sides," end quote. I mean, he's really saying something here, Campbell, that this is the biggest challenge the U.S. has ever faced in its history. Because what's the implication there? I mean, the U.S. fought in World War II, and how many millions of people, tens of millions of people were killed then? And it's like, the implication here is that this is going to lead to some sort of huge war or something like that. And that is what the U.S. military is planning for. As I covered yesterday, the U.S. Navy unveiled this plan to be ready for a direct war with China by 2027, which is not that far away. 2024 is winding down. So that means in about 2 years and a few months, they're saying that they're going to be ready for war with China. So very, very concerning stuff. All right, so the next one here, and here's another thing. EU defense official says that Europe must be ready to fight Russia in 6 to 8 years. So Andrius Kubilius, I apologize, I probably mispronounced his name. I should have checked before I recorded this, but Kubilius, he's the former Lithuanian prime minister and the EU's first defense commissioner. He has said that Europe must be ready to fight Russia within 6 to 8 years. He said, quote, "Defense ministers and NATO generals agree that Vladimir Putin could be ready for confrontation with NATO and the EU in 6 to 8 years. If we take these assessments seriously, then that is the time for us to properly prepare, and it is a short one. This means we have to take quick decisions and ambitious decisions," end quote. So NATO has been preparing for a future war with Russia, despite the risk of the conflict quickly turning nuclear. Same thing as the U.S. military preparing for war with China. NATO recently, for the first time since the Cold War, started approving plans for war with Russia. So when it comes to the EU, I mean, the EU doesn't really have much impact on military policy, since individual EU members are responsible for their own defense. But the appointment of Kubilius shows that the bloc is looking to increase its involvement in war planning. So this is a new position, the defense commissioner. He said, quote, "The European Union won't have defense plans or military leadership like NATO does, but the European Union has instruments to get larger financing, which NATO does not," end quote. So the former Lithuanian leader is a staunch supporter of the Ukraine proxy war. He's a huge Russia hawk. He said that his first job is to see what resources the EU has available to prepare for a future fight. He told Reuters that he would like to see an investment of more than 500 billion euros in the next few years to build up European militaries. So this was on Wednesday that he said this, and then the next day, the EU's parliament passed a resolution calling on European countries to allow Ukraine to use Western weapons for long-range strikes inside Russia. And Putin has warned that would mean NATO is at war with Russia. In response to this, the head of Russia's State Duma, which is their lower house of parliament, said, quote, "What the European Parliament is calling for leads to a world war using nuclear weapons," end quote. So this is what they are messing with here. So just not good. You got the U.S. Navy saying it's preparing for war with China by 2027. The EU saying it should be prepared for war with Russia in 6 to 8 years. You know, just not good stuff. There's a lot of money to be made here when it comes to increasing military spending, both in the U.S. and in Europe. That's another way that the Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, these companies have made a killing off of all the European countries increasing their military spending in the wake of the Russian invasion. Especially Poland and the Eastern European countries have been buying a whole bunch of weapons. It's not just the weapons being flooded into Ukraine. And of course, they're making a killing on Taiwan, Philippines, and everything over there as well. All right, so the last story here, Israeli troops throw bodies of Palestinian men off buildings. And this is in the West Bank. So a shocking video has surfaced showing Israeli soldiers throwing the bodies of Palestinian men from buildings during an assault on the town of Qabatia, north of the West Bank on Thursday. In the West Bank on Thursday. Palestinians shared the footage on social media showing Israeli occupation soldiers mutilating the bodies of 3 Palestinians killed before throwing them from the roof of a house that morning. The video captures 3 Israeli soldiers climbing onto the roof, holding the bodies and throwing them one by one from the top. Earlier that day, the Israeli army launched a military operation in Qabatia, besieging a house and killing 3 Palestinians inside. In total, at least 7 Palestinians were killed throughout the day. This town is near Jenin in the north. The Palestinian Health Ministry reported that at least 5 others were wounded by Israeli fire, though they remain in stable condition. So you could see this video, and it is pretty disturbing here. It shows them just kind of slowly pushing this body off, just kicking it off the roof. And they look mutilated. I saw another video where you could see, I don't really even want to say, their guts out and everything. Just really horrific, brutal stuff. I mean, it looks like some kind of ISIS video. But this is the Jewish state, not the Islamic state. It's just really vicious stuff that's happening. Again, this is the West Bank. This isn't even in Gaza. All right. So that is it for the news for today. Sorry for all that depressing stuff, but go check out our Viewpoints. One from Robert J. Lifton, Confronting the Nuclear Threat That Haunts the World. One from Brad Pierce, Israel's Pager Terrorism. One from Elizabeth Murray, The Freedom Flotilla Ship Handala Makes Waves. One from Judge Napolitano, Gitmo and Politics. One from James Carden, Why U.S. Foreign Policy Won't Grow Up. So please go check all of that out. Go check out our blog. Ron Paul, Liberty Report is reposted in there. Their show on Israel opening a new front in Lebanon. Lots of other stuff there too. And then if you go down, we have a big Lebanon section about details of the pager and walkie-talkie attacks, if you want to go check that out. So that is it for me for today. That's it for the week. I hope everyone has a good weekend. If you want to support this show, share it. Tell your friends about antiwar.com. Like, subscribe, comment, follow us on social media. I appreciate everyone who does. I'll be back in a few days. Thanks for listening.